Hi, it's Jonathan, and this was a presentation I did for Homeopathy Simplified as part of the giveaway software lecture series, and it's kind of interesting. So I'm going to add this to the section, the lesson on treating neurological diseases. And I think it's a good review, so let's see how it looks. So this lecture was about using Böenninghausen's Repertory to treat neurological diseases. So I announced it as a clearer path to assimilum. And the point was to show how adaptive Böenninghausen's Repertory is to such complex disorders as neurological disorders. So first of all, let's talk about what are neurological disorders again. And in this instance, we're going to see the medium blue as being the general pathologies. And I'm going to show on the right neuromuscular, leading to MS, Parkinson's, and neuropathic pain syndromes. And then trauma, how those affect from head injuries especially, vision issues, etc. And then headaches and trigeminal facial pain, we see migraines as well. And that's what this case is really all about. But not to forget any of the other causes. The general syndromes are all covered by homeopathy. So first we'll talk about the prevalence of neurological disease. This is a repeat for those of you who've watched the bigger video of this lesson, but I'll run through it quickly. So these are diseases of the central and peripheral nervous system. In other words, the brain, spinal cord, cranial nerves, peripheral nerves, nerve roots, the whole autonomic nervous system, neuromuscular junctions, and muscles. Of course, tendons and ligaments and fascia are also affected. So these disorders include epilepsy, Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, cerebrovascular diseases including stroke, migraine and other headache disorders, MS, Parkinson's, neurological infections, brain tumors, trauma disorders of the nervous system due to head trauma, and then neurological disorders as a result of malnutrition. There are, of course, many bacterial causes, meningitis, Neisseria, and then viral conditions. In fact, post-COVID virus has been very much a trigger for many neurological diseases. We see West Nile virus, Zika, it could be Lyme's, etc., etc. Then we have fungal causes and parasitic causes can also affect the nervous system. And, those parasites can actually eat away at your nervous system. But mostly it's an autoimmune response that we're dealing with. So the prevalence of neurological disease. So hundreds of millions of people worldwide are affected by neurological disorders. More than 6 million people die because of stroke each year. Over 80% of these deaths take place in low and middle income countries, and more than 50 million people have epilepsy worldwide. It's estimated that there are globally 47.5 million people with dementia, 7.7 million new cases every year of Alzheimer's disease being the most common cause of dementia and may contribute to 60 to 70% of those cases. Amazingly, the prevalence of migraines is more than 10% of the population worldwide. A lot. So using Böenninghausen's Repertory and pocketbook, therapeutic pocketbook, it's important to have a look at the difference again between Kent's schema and Böenninghausen's schema. So again, what a repertory tries to achieve is the condensing of remedy data from the source of provings and clinical use to achieve a searchable database. The style of repertories are quite different, And the most striking example of this is between Böenninghausen and Kent repertories. So Kent is the root of most the modern repertories, being synthesis, or Adonis as it's called now, and the complete repertory. But what's important is that the therapeutic pocketbook and Böenninghausen's repertory were really the root of Kent's repertory. So they're actually more similar than they are different. But the biggest difference you'll find is that Böenninghausen was to generalize the particular symptoms. And I should put some examples of that, but we'll go back to the repertory lesson to review that. Whereas Kent, in his repertory, would only generalize the particular symptoms if a symptom was expressed in more than one location. So I find that to be a bit of a misnomer, because I think the whole purpose of Böenninghausen was to generalize those symptoms that were in more than one location, and that's why he would generalize them. But anyway, Kent had also a different concept of the hierarchy of the symptoms, placing greater emphasis on the mental and emotional spheres. So all in all, it's a big difference in the philosophies of the repertories, where, in a sense, we're simplifying the symptom state with Böenninghausen, and we're trying to expand the symptom state with Kent. But I think this next case will show you an example of how it's very useful to sometimes generalize the particular symptoms. So anyway, we go to the layout of Böenninghausen's therapeutic pocketbook. And just to remind, it's the index to homeopathy's first 125 remedies, this wonderful structured and searchable database. Now, the 125 remedies becomes an interesting subject, because those remedies were formed from original data, from the early provings of Hahnemann and his followers, and Herring and so forth. So we see these very accurate remedy lists, symptoms listed according to the provings of the remedy, which were done in the early days of homeopathy. And I think there's something to be said for that. It also contains the remedy relationships, whereby remedies that follow each other well, remedies that antidote each other, etc. The information overall has withstood the test of time and continues to be one of the most reliable sources for prescribing remedies with success. Again, to remind about the layout of Böenninghausen's therapeutic pocketbook. So we have 7 sections, the first being the mind and intellect. And the oldest editions used to call it mind and soul. Then we go to the parts of the body and the organs. Then the third section is very important. We have the sensations and complaints in general, and then broken up into sections of the glands, of the bones, and of the skin. The sleep and dreams section adds a lot to the mind and intellect section. And then fever. We have all of the different stages of fevers. So the circulation of blood, the coldness in general, heat in general, how those affect the patient, perspiration of the patient, and then compound fevers. And then we see the concomitant symptoms and complaints at the end of section 5. So section 6 gives all of the alterations of the state of health. So how a person has changed in their state of disease will be found here. We see the aggravations according to time, the aggravations according to situations and circumstance, meaning things like being indoors or outdoors, or moving this or moving that. And then we see the ameliorations of positions and circumstance, similar to the aggravations. And finally, the relationships. So a really simple layout, and it takes time to get familiar with this. Kent's precision at laying out the complete body in its repertory is somehow easier, perhaps. So the logic of Böenninghausen's therapeutic pocketbook becomes the logic of his methodology, where he states that an ideal symptom consists of 4 essential components. What is the symptom? Where is the symptom? How is the symptom influenced or modified? And then the accompanying symptoms that are concomitant to the symptom specific. So these we see examples such as thirst with fever, chill with desire for open air. And the quadrangle here of sensations, modalities, concomitants, and location. Now, you may not have symptoms with all those reference points, but 2 or 3 of these is ultimately important. There's no sense having a symptom with 120 remedies in it if it's just the sensation or the location. We need to add more detail to help refine the remedy choices. So these are some of the famous homeopaths of our time, of our history, and they gave great commendation to Böenninghausen's work. Erastus Case, he writes, "It may, however, give characteristics so plainly that the remedies requiring comparison shall be few." And that is really the point of Böenninghausen's work, to reduce the number of remedies to 3, 4, 5 that you can differentiate in the materia medica. The experience of nearly a century has verified the truth of Böenninghausen's idea and enabled us, in the use of his masterpiece, the therapeutic pocketbook, to overcome, to a great extent, the imperfections and limitations of our materia medica. Stuart Close. These homeopaths are really eminent homeopaths. Not forgetting what Hahnemann wrote about mental and emotional. He writes in Aphorism 2:11, "This preeminent importance of the emotional state holds good to such an extent that the patient's emotional state often tips the scales in the selection of the homeopathic remedy." So he writes often, and it's true to say, when there is a marked emotional and mental state that you can use as a repertory source to find a rubric, or as a mental and emotional state to confirm in the materia medica, it will often tip the scale in the choice of the remedy. However, we don't always have strong and marked mental and emotional states to prescribe on. So back to the therapeutic pocketbook and the mind rubrics in it. So the usefulness remains as strong as the mental characteristics are quantifiable as basic emotions. So what that means is that as long as you can identify a basic emotion, you can definitely find it in the therapeutic pocketbook, such as cheerful, sad, irritable, mania, and so on. These are basic mental and emotional expressions once the patient is in a changed state due to their illness. There's no good putting cheerful if that's the way they are naturally. So it's in the materia medicas that we can choose the mental state as a confirmatory symptom in the remedy for the patient. Here's a list of the remedies that are in the therapeutic pocketbook, and the numbers beside them are the number of remedies within the rubric. So affection of the mind in general, basically every remedy is there, of course in different degrees. Anxiety, fear, fearfulness, good rubric to use. maliciousness, bold, seriousness, cheerfulness, or happiness, irritability, indifference, covetousness, which is envy, haughtiness, pride, hopelessness, despair, mistrust, mildness, sadness, cross, glum, and grumpy. Amativeness means more loving than would be really natural. A changeable mood. So that's a common state. Affection in general, affection of the intellect in general, in other words, your thinking and clarity. Excitement of the intellect. Understanding easy, understanding difficult. Imbecility, delirium and hallucinations, illusions and obsession. Ecstasy, mania and madness. Absent-mindedness, quick and active memory, poor and weak memory, and then memory lost. Then some senses, drowsiness, stupefaction, numbness, vertigo, and then drowsiness. So there we see really 36 rubrics in the mind section. And there are also 17 rubrics useful under the aggravations, excitement, emotional. And then we see the subrubrics, contradiction, grief and sorrow, jealousy, joy, unhappy love, humiliation, reproaches, rudeness of others. So these are essentially aggravation, emotional, from the rudeness of others, from scorn, being scorned essentially. And then vexation, upset, from anxiety, fright, quiet grief, indignation, and violence. So all very important emotional states that we can use. So these 17 plus the 36 yields essentially the range of human emotions. And so perhaps it is too much to simplify and generalize these. However, if you see them as they are, without necessarily attaching the emotional story underneath them, then they're useful. And another important section is in sleep and dreams. Okay, so I went backwards. Here we are. So this is a case of a woman aged 52 who has had an incredible story of pain in her life. And it's a neuropathic pain which she feels in her side, her right side, under her axilla, under her armpit, into her rib cage. And it refers down her arm to her elbow and down her back on the right side. And this is an intense, ongoing pain. So much so that she had a surgery to implant a spinal stimulator to help numb the pain. Spinal stimulator is sort of like a TENS machine, but internally, and it just stimulates a vibration, electrical current that masks the pain a little bit. On top of that, she suffers from migraines, daily migraines, and we'll see the intensity later, all worse during her period, and the cause was a bunch of spinal injuries from childhood. So she also had a surgery for thoracic outlet syndrome, basically where they try and free the nerve from the neck through the brachial groove between the collarbone and the pectoralis muscle, taking the nerves and freeing them so that there's less impingement on them. And that was not helpful. So her migraines used to be 24/7, 10 out of 10. She was completely incapacitated. And she recently discovered microdosing psilocybin mushrooms. And that's been a real relief for her. She also takes progesterone, I think 100 milligrams a day. She's had treatment with acupuncturists, and she also was trying a ketogenic diet to see if, being on a high-protein diet would help her inflammation. So overview of her symptoms. She's got this neuropathic pain to her arm and right side. She's had surgeries. She had an ablation of her cervical nerves at C2 and C3, and then the stimulator implant. She has constant aching from her right side neck to her wrist, and then intense, severe shooting into her wrists. She uses the stimulator to dull the pain. The right side latissimus dorsi, the muscle underneath your armpit against your chest, the rib cage, has numbness and a referred pain to the elbow. This is worse when she uses her arm or raises it, and she's better lying down, resting. And of course, everything is worse during times of a migraine, and migraines are worse when she has a migraine, or a period rather. Sorry, I was just trying to see if this would come on screen. So does the implant track how much you use it or not, or turn it up and down?
No.
No, there's no record of that.
No.
Okay. I think you're using it as consistently as well.
I just leave it on 24/7. Yeah, it saves batteries to not keep using the remote, so I don't bring the remote with me everywhere I go. I just leave it at the same level. It's flowing through me now. It's not strong, but it's not weak either. It's just a nice level that helps with the pain. But yeah, I don't, there's no history there. It's a pretty simple device.
Where is the implant implanted?
Yeah, the wires are in my neck. And I start at C2, C3, which is the most sensitive area of my neck. That's where a lot of the lesions are. That's where I had problems since I was a kid as well. And there's two, what they call flags, that keep it in place. And then the wires come down into the battery, which is in my lower back. Yeah. But the effect is just here, unless I make it stronger, and then it seems to spread down my right side, which is kind of nice. But mostly all day, I just feel it coming down here. But most of the wiring is in my neck.
How was the holding off on the Sakali
That was good.
and just taking the belladonna?
Yeah, that was good because the head to toe pain improved dramatically. My arm pain, this is the best week we've had. It's remained low, 5, 6, with little hints of 7, which is just extraordinary. So this is the longest relief I've ever had. I've kept my spinal cord stimulator off. This time I didn't even turn it on and off when I felt like I needed it. I thought it'd be better to just see what it was like to just keep it off for a whole week. The spasticity is still a problem. And that's my old problem. What, maybe 2 weeks ago now? Maybe 2 days? And I've been able to manage it by lying down a lot, but traveling tomorrow. So I got wheelchair assistance just in case. But I kind of overdid it, like I told you this weekend, which didn't help things. Like going to that concert and dinner. And so I think I'm still recovering from that.
So that symptom
is
from when you were 30.
7, started at 7, yeah. And if I don't manage it, it can get really out of control in terms of pinched nerves and stiff neck and not being able to move at all. But it's been a long time since it's gotten out of control because I've traveled before when I've had it, And I just lie down on the airport floor when, I have to. But I've been ambulatory for it 3 times in my life. At age 7, age 16, and then I think it was 27. But it's been a long time.
So what does it feel like?
It feels like it starts with a nerve signal. And it starts usually here in my shoulder and my neck. And it's subtle at first. It's like the nerves, it's like they initiate a signal, and my small muscle groups start to spasm, and it starts small, and then it just slowly spreads, and the muscles around that aren't spasming atrophy. They get too soft, and then the muscles that are spasming turn into bone. It's so hard. And it's usually on my left side, but occasionally it'll go to the right for a little bit. Yeah. And I get relief when I lie down. When it's bad, I have to wear a neck brace so that I don't make it worse.
At 7 years old, what happened? Was it just accumulation of injuries, or?
Yeah, my mother fell with me at a newborn on the ice, and then at age 2 and 3, I was on the bucket seat of her bicycle, and she lost control of her bike, and the bike fell backwards, and I hit my head. That happened actually twice. And then I got bucked by a horse that got stung by a bee, and then I fell off the skateboard and hit my chin. And both of those times I had seizures. I had seizures up until I was 10. And they were worried I was going to be like my dad because he suffered from seizures his whole childhood. Thankfully they stopped. But
do you remember if there was anything done to intervene with the seizure?
no, they just did tests, and they didn't find anything. And they just kept an eye on me, basically. I was at the doctor a lot, started pretty early. And I had to be careful because of that incident at age 7, so they wouldn't let me carry my books to school and stuff like that. And they just, and then I had to pick the profession of a dancer, which wasn't too hard. So, I think it was just an accumulation of all those accidents in a short period of time while I was still growing. That's what everybody thinks. I'd be surprised if it were anything different, but and because I'm so flexible, I would go back into alignment just sometimes from walking, because but I go out of alignment also very easily.
So ages since I saw you.
Yeah, it's been a month. And I had the longest stretch of good arm pain that I've ever had. I think it was a week to 10 days into my trip that it lasted, the low pain. And then I think I told you when that started going downhill, because I think we were trying to set up a session.
Yeah. And that was when the period was going to.
Yeah, then the period came, and then the period for 11 days, which wasn't good because that increased my pain for that long. Oh, but the good news is that the spasticity hasn't come back. Didn't come back for the whole trip. So that period was, I think, about a month of spasticity, and then it was still lingering before my trip, which I remember it made me nervous because traveling is tough with that because I need to lean back. But I had a little bit on the flight over, but nothing super severe. And then didn't come back for the whole trip, which was great. I mean, I could feel it starting, and then it never did, so that was great.
Okay, so sorry about the dogs. We had 2 dogs there, Lucia and Layla, best friends, and they just can't stop wrestling when they see each other. So yeah, it got too much, and so she didn't bring Layla back to the studio here. Anyway, I just want to go over her symptoms a little bit and just point out some of the factors, and then talk about the quick succession of clips that showed some of the changes that she was experiencing. So these migraines are daily, 7 out of 10, and she's now able to thwart the onset where she's debilitated by using belladonna. So she was using belladonna for at least 3 months, and with great success, and we recently went to 50M. She was using belladonna 10M for 3 months, and now we're using 50M. And she might use that once or twice daily in order to thwart the migraine. And that sounds like a lot of dose, but that's what works. You can't really imagine how bad her nervous system is until you really see her in her symptoms. It's debilitating. And so why would you wait if you've got something that will help? Yes, we've tried a couple of other remedies in between. Bryonia was not working at all. And then, interestingly, around her period, we used a remedy called Sikali for the excessive flow and long duration. And since then, she's been in menopause, so she's missed her last period, and which she feels really good about. The other aspect is that you heard her talk about spasms on her. You're seeing this on my right side, in your mirror, on her right side neck, left side neck rather, and normally her pains are right-sided. Well, this is really an old symptom. The spasm that would debilitate her from childhood happened so many times, and when she ended up in hospital 3 or 4 times from that symptom. Well, that symptom came back, and we actually used arnica when it was at its worst, and it's kind of a layer of her recovery. So, of course, things are worse during her period, and these are some of the symptoms I was able to use. Worse warm weather, worse movement, worse while waking, better being alone, worse menstruation, and she had a fast heart rate too, just all the time. And then talking about the hierarchy of mental and emotional symptoms, I couldn't really find anything, to be truthful. I just saw this person who has this incredible resilience to take on her symptoms. Just amazing, and how relieving it was to get some window of time of less intense duration of the migraines from the psilocybin mushrooms. And I just think it's remarkable that she can be as normal as she is with that level of pain. So this was just a quick introduction about polarity analysis, which you already know, and I'll give it anyway because it's kind of a short introduction that you can use to talk about to other people. So developed by Heine Fry, it is an analysis of the contraindications that show up in the opposite symptoms of the therapeutic pocketbook. It is the method of repertorization I used in the case, and these polar opposite symptoms are further arguments for or against a chosen remedy. Now, I have put up for this video the actual first repertorization that I did, and you can see the rubrics I chose, very general rubrics. The location was her wrist, was being the most acute pain. I wanted to make sure the remedy had that. Raising the limb, very general rubric. Better becoming warmth, worse during her menses. And here I didn't find a lot of polar symptoms. In fact, she did an intake form where almost every symptom was marked. And so it was really difficult to find really what were truly general particulars of her case. So anyway, I came up with a few remedies, and I chose to give belladonna based on the migraine especially, because I just felt that without addressing the migraine, the nerves in the arm and the cervical nerves that cause those symptoms could not begin to repair, whereas being able to give relief for the migraine was really the first step. And you heard her talk about going to dinners and parties and dancing. Well, that's unheard of in years and years for her. So she's gained so much of her life back from just simply taking belladonna. And then experimenting into currently the bryonia, the cicali, and the left-sided spasm, we used arnica, which was very useful. Here's a little bit about belladonna. This is from Alan's primer of Materia Medica. And what I wanted to put, it has the action on the heart. She has that fast heart rate. And then it always ends in stupor, all the conditions, convulsions, dilated pupils. And this is very much like the migraine state. And she has to lie down, which is, of course, not unusual for migraines. But I also saw in the generalities that epileptiform, meaning seizures, followed by an apoplectic condition. And that really is her state. When she's had an episode, she's just wiped out and laying. Head symptoms, very intense headache symptoms in belladonna. And then the extremities also having tearing pains, shooting, paralytic pains, cutting, shooting pains, da-da-da-da-da. So that was my rationale, and as it turns out, it's been, the most reliable remedy for her. So doing the simplistic case-taking can be very useful. In fact, I can show you very quickly the repertorization of later, where I did have more polar symptoms. So, for example, just from earlier this month, we saw her, and here we had a lot more polar symptoms. Unfortunately, not a lot of contraindications, and Nux came out on top. Bryonia again, but we've tried that. And you see belladonna is not even there at this time. So even though belladonna is still helping the migraine, it's almost as if we're trying to treat a couple of conditions at the same time. So an interesting case, and I think well worth looking at in terms of the simplicity of Böenninghausen, not to get too elaborate in the details and the minutiae of symptoms, but just really keeping it generalized. And the benefit of the questionnaires really speaks to that process. Okay, great. So see you in the next recording.